host Dreadwing dive into the world of magic and explore the most stories full of wonder, fantastical delights. The lights!
Aragnid watched as he grimaced through the next bout of his metamorphism. She saw his body was beginning to weaken as his glowing eyes started to dim out, and deduced that his body now needed an energy source to resupply where his original source could no longer support him. It was expected, but she had originally theorized that it wouldn't be until the sixth injection that his body would reconvert itself to process the living source of energy all Cybertronians existed off of. He needed energon. Luckily for him, the cavern they were in had a fresh deposit of energon crystals that had yet to be discovered by the Decepticons. From the scale and size, there was enough to supply her with the needed amount and to begin giving to Jack while his body continued to change. His transformation was going faster than she anticipated, and she needed to step up her process. As quick as she could in her own agonizing state, she forced her hands to work skillfully to extract the energon safely and begin converting it into its consumable form. She then had to figure out a way to administer the energon into Jack, as he had yet to form an outlet on his body to allow her to recharge him. He was still mostly organic, and whenever she moved the webbing, he'd scream in panic, so she could not look within and check just how far his body had come along. It was when she kissed him to calm him down that she got an idea. Taking the energon, she poured small doses of it into her mouth, and then went over to Jack and kissed him. Like he had done before, he accepted her kiss, and when he parted his mouth, she pushed the energon slowly into his. In pure reaction, he gulped the energon down and started coughing some, but then to her delight, the glow in his eyes started to immediately brighten and his look of agony started to lessen. Seeing her method worked, she fed him in that same manner 3 more times until he looked filled and appeared to finally be handling the painful transformation. With his body still somewhat smaller than her own and with his growing need for energon, she calculated that he would need to be fed every half hour, until his body adapted to start storing the energon properly. She hummed in contentment. Everything was going perfectly for her. Jack's transformation was coming along beautifully and soon would be ready to begin making their empire. She also had other things she was really looking forward to trying once Jack was functionally compatible with her anatomy. Out of her curiosity to understand the human race, she had done some research on what made the race tick. How they grew, how they maintained themselves ... and how they replicated more of themselves. The term they used for it was sex, and she had seen enough organic life to know it was rather messy and gross in a way. She had seen some bizarre species mating rituals and they did nothing but fill her with disgust. But humans made mating an interesting pastime. They were so focused on the pleasure it brought rather than the simple act. It wasn't just runting for them. It seemed to hold more purpose and was the true form of loving someone rather than just replicating another of their species. It had emotional connections as well as attraction. She was curious enough to study their mating habits from afar when she scouted more humans for her fun. She remembered one couple in particular. She let them live only because they amused her enough to show them mercy. They had snuck out into the woods and the female initiated a race through the growth. From on top of the trees, she watched as the male gave chase after his partner and tracked her down like prey. It wasn't long before he got to her and tackled her down to the ground, leaving them both in a fit of giggles. It was a strange act for a hunter like her. To her, when you caught your prey, it was time to kill, but for this coupling pair, it was something else. The chase must have been some kind of rite of passage to claim the female, as she laid on the ground passively and allowed the male to do as he pleased with her body. She encouraged him to devour her in a passionate way and removed her protective coverings to expose all her soft flesh. This was obviously what the male wanted to see, because as soon as he got her chest uncovered, he attacked the mounds of flesh that made up the female's milking glands that were used to feed her young. Arachnid then watched in mild fascination as the male played with them quite extensively. It appeared to her easily that the female really enjoyed the act, as she was moaning loudly and arching her frame up to push against his. Once that part of the ritual was done, he then traveled down to her pelvis and explored the entrance to what she believed was a human female's birth chamber entrance. When he got to that part, she really appeared to enjoy the attention down there as he teased and poked her tunnel with his fingers and tongue, and soon cried out as a clear-like fluid started leaking out of her system. It was interesting to her to see a living being squirt their fluids out of their bodies and take such satisfaction from it. For her kind, if fluids began to leak, it meant they were damaged and ran the risk of going offline. The scene picked up when the male started to uncover himself, allowing her to see that unlike the female, the male had an organic probing rod stationed at the front of his cogpiece. The rod was pulsing eagerly and from its tip a bit of fluids was dripping out of it. The female got excited when she saw the rod and began to work her hands around it, pumping its length vigorously. Then to her shock, she saw the female bring her mouth to the rod and applied suction to it, working to extract something from inside the male. The male took great pleasure from it, if how his features were showing while the female administered his probing rod. After some time, the female was rewarded for her effort as the male now leaked a stream of white-yellowish fluid into her mouth. She did not let a drop go to waste as she continued to suck on the rod, until it was done producing the material. At that point, Arachnid thought it was over and decided now was a good time to have her own fun with them, but then she saw they began to continue. The male took his softening rod and worked it until it was operational again, and then he led it down to her birthing chamber entrance. He inserted the rod and the female rolled and arched her back up once the rod was fully attached inside her. Studying this reaction, Arachnid had chosen to continue her silent observation. She watched on as the male started to unlatch himself from her body, only to thrust it back in, causing the female to scream. It was different than the kind she preferred to hear. It was loud and wild, but there was no hint of fear or pain when she started screaming. The female wrapped her legs around his waist and started forcing him to reinsert himself into her frame and caused her back to arch once more. This part she understood as the real runting part of the mating rite. The thrusting action was somewhat similar to one alien species of reptilian-based creatures she came across, that would pin their mate down and pump their probing rod until the needed material from their body was expelled into their partner's chamber, giving her the needed genetic data to allow her body to start the replication process. That species hadn't been so lucky with her after that kind of finish. When she was done, all that was left were their heads and some genetic samples she took to add to the cocktail she had injected into her Jack. The reptilian-like race had some fierce qualities that she admired and felt they would be beneficial for Jack's new life. Back with the humans she had observed, she waited until the male had finished administering his genetic data into the female, and it took far longer than the reptilian species took. The male looked to be fighting to keep his data inside him and seemed to be completely focused on just the stimulation the situation offered them. The female did not complain as she too was begging her partner to try and make it last. But biology soon kicked in and the male was forced to release his data inside the female and the two collapsed together on the ground and held each other while still hooked up by their interlocking parts. Once they were finished admitting their feelings through a combination of words and kissing, they unlatched from each other and put their protective coverings back on and headed out of the woods. Arachnid had kept a log of that moment in her databanks just in case the incident provided her with some useful information. She began replaying the log over and over in her mind as she waited between injections and feeding. She analyzed the female's parts to see if she could replicate them to her personal specifications. The techno-organic parts that she had long suppressed responded eagerly and she jolted some when her form began to reconfigure to match what she remembered from the data log. It was strange for her and a little unsettling when her parts began to reformat into curvier shapes and her chest plate started to feel tingly underneath the protective armor that guarded her interior parts. She had made sure to leave most of her protective armor, feeling it would be extremely necessary to safeguard her spark chamber and other vital parts. She thought she would need to scan a human female's framework to help the reformatting, but it seemed the organic nature of the virus within her knew all it needed to make the change possible. It was slow going as the virus had much work to do after her centuries of suppressing it. It would take the same amount of time as her beloved partner's transformation for her body to be ready for the kind of activity she eagerly wished to try out. There were some disadvantages she was finding to allowing the virus to take its course with her systems. Her vehicle mode would suffer greatly and she wouldn't be able to change into her slick silent helicopter mode anymore, as her plating was beginning to take on a more carapace-like appearance to it. Her damaged appendages had started to repair themselves, but in place of their original end pieces, a black serrated bladed limb formed out, giving the appendages the appearance of a real spider's leg. From her back, where her extra set of legs were attached, a stabbing pain had started, and when she looked back to check on the area, she found she was growing 2 more sets of appendages and they were metallic, but at the same time organic like the repaired limb. Her alt mode soon vanished from her memory data core, her processor stating that it was no longer optional to her anymore. That was the sacrifice she would have to pay. She would have to adapt and take on a more suitable transformation mode, and from the way she was changing it was no challenge at all that she would take on a pure spider-like form. Arachnid. A weak, altering voice called out to her. She pulled out of her inner thoughts and looked over to her Jack. He was gazing at her with need. Feeling weak again. He wheezed as best he could through his changing throat. "I'll fix that, my darling." Arachnid swooned as she filled her mouth with more energon and began to mouth feed him again, purring as the sensation of his tongue licking her mouth clean made her insides vibrate. She had to repeat the act 8 more times until he had his fill, and then he closed his eyes tiredly and looked to have fallen asleep once more. His body was transforming faster if he needed more and more energon. Happily, she would feed his growing hunger if it continued to be so stimulating like this, hoping later on that he would return the favor and satisfy a hunger she was starting to crave. She sat back down near him and began to replay the mating data log once more. Wheeljack had kept himself busy during his stay at the base by doing what he did best, and that was making things go boom. He had worked it out with Ratchet, and the medic allowed him to start booby-trapping the base in case there were any surprise attacks by the Decepticons. The human representative for the humans' government was all for it, because if the base did become compromised by the enemy, then they could destroy any evidence and if they were lucky, take out some of the bad guys with it. It was better than just sitting around and watching his old wrecker buddy lying on the berth. He sat there long enough to pay his friend the respect he deserved, but then it was getting too much for him to deal with and felt he should do something. It wouldn't have done any good to just sit around while the Decepticons made their way to the base anyway. He had rigged a few well-placed explosives at vital points that would cause the whole place to cave in on itself after they've made their escape. If by some miracle the Decepticons didn't show up long enough for them to evacuate, he'd set a trigger up so the Decepticons would set off the explosives themselves. Once he was finished with his job, he returned to the main chamber. "There we go, Doc. Whole place is set to be blown all the way back to Cybertron," Wheeljack remarked. Ratchet cringed at the nickname the wrecker loved to call him by. "You said my real name, once. Is it so hard to ask that you actually use it?" "Maybe later, Doc," Wheeljack snickered and walked over to Maiko, ignoring the glare the medic bot shot at him. "You're gonna wear a permanent imprint of your rear in his chest plate if you don't move around, kid." Maiko just continued to stare at Bulkhead. Wheeljack sighed and rubbed the side of his helm. "Look, Maiko. I know you're worried about Bulkhead and hope he comes back to us, but you can't let it get to you like this. You gotta think about keeping your strength up and be ready for when he does wake up. At least he's still with us. Just barely, Maiko murmured. That's better than whatever state your human friend is in. He's out there with a psychobot and probably worse for wear. Aren't you concerned at all? Wheeljack replied. Maiko shot up to her feet and pointed a fist at him. Of course, I'm worried for Jack. That bitch of a spiderbot has him and could be disemboweling him right now. But what can I do? I can't leave Bulkhead. Bad things happen when I leave him. Wheeljack grunted. You still on that? Come on, I thought you were made of sterner stuff, after what you pulled off with taking out that Insecticon. I guess it was just a fluke then. Wheeljack. Ratchet barked. You have no right to talk to Maiko like that. Humphrey, I'm just saying like it is, Doc. I thought she was wrecker material, but I guess I was wrong, Wheeljack replied offhandedly as he started to turn around, only to stop when something banged into the back of his head. He looked back to see a wrench by his feet, then drew his attention at a furious Maiko. I'll show you if I'm a wrecker or not. I'll make every Decepticon I see pay for what happened to Bulkhead, and if you ever say it was just a fluke again, I'll RIP out your optics. Maiko screamed in rage. Wheeljack held up his hands defensively and took a step back from the enraged human girl. Whoa, there Maiko. I didn't really mean it. I just wanted to see if you still had some fire in your engine. Seems you do. You better believe it, Buster. Maiko huffed and placed her hands on her hips. Well, then, Spitfire. How about I start teaching you what you'll need to know if you wanna be a real wrecker? Wheeljack offered. What, really? Maiko perked up. Yeah, why not? I'm sure Bulkhead will be thrilled to see you taking on the cons like a true-born wrecker like him. I bet that'll make him really happy, Wheeljack stated. Wait a minute, Wheeljack. She's too young and too, no offense, Maiko, fragile to learn how to fight if you're planning on what I think you're planning, Ratchet protested firmly. Wheeljack brushed him off with a wave of his hand. Come on, Doc. It's better she be doing something constructive than mopping around on Bulkhead's chest, don't you think? She'll end up leaving a rust spot on him if she does. I can do it, Ratchet. I know I can learn whatever Wheeljack throws at me. Maiko exclaimed. It's your safety that I'm worried about, and I know Optimus would object, Ratchet retorted. Hey, I'm just trying to give the kids some hope and something to do in case things go further south on us, Doc. My best bud is lying on that berth like a pile of scrap, and we got cons that might be gearing up to blow us all to the allspark. Plus, if the big bot was a better leader, he would have started training these kids on how to defend themselves at the very least. Look what happened with RC's human partner, huh? He didn't stand a chance and now he's at the mercy of a Decepticon. At the very least, let me make sure that doesn't happen to Maiko. Wheeljack blasted at the medic before slouching his shoulders and looking away. It's the only thing I can do to help Bulkhead. Ratchet groaned in frustration and turned away sharply. Fine. Do whatever you want, but if Optimus doesn't like it, you are going to explain it to him, not me. Thanks, Doc. Knew you'd understand. Wheeljack replied back and smirked at Maiko as he winked. She winked back and cheered silently. So, where do we start? Well, first thing, kid. What do you know about handling explosives? Wheeljack grinned at her. RC was zooming along at top speed on an old dirt road that led to the old mine. They had just gotten confirmation from the agent they had talked to earlier that the energon splatters did indicate she continued in the direction of the mine. They had finished cleaning up any evidence of Arachnid's presence in the neighborhood, and were heading out to their location to help clean up any more traces of leaked energon. The agent wanted to send a team to go in with them, but as expected, Optimus Prime had declined it, wanting to keep human fatalities down to 1. She hated to think that Jack was going to turn out to be just another collateral death to their secret war, Just another body among the dead in her life, but there was no looking at it any other way unless she can save him. The odds had already been against them, and it was just a matter of time before Jack's life was up. Arachnid could be doing any method of torture to him, waiting for them to show up, so RC can watch as another person she cared for died, because she was too powerless to stop the vicious psychopathic Decepticon. She continued to pray to Primus that she still had time, that she would save Jack and end this nightmare once and for all. She had spared Arachnid because she wanted to do the right thing and not sink to her level, but if she found Jack hurt in any way, all bets were off. She would see that Arachnid went offline forever. "Come on. We got to hurry," RC called back to her fellow Autobots. Bumblebee was having slight trouble with the loose train. His chooser vehicle was not meant for these kinds of trails. His tires kept on spinning more than covering distance. It was only his incredible driving skills that kept him from falling behind. Optimus did not have that problem at all. His bulk may have been an issue in terms of speed and maneuverability on the open road, but his large wheels and tracks were perfect for rough roads such as this one and was almost catching up to RC. "We should be reaching the mines any moment now," Optimus Prime alerted his team. "Prepare for anything and keep a lookout for any leads of Arachnid. If she is here, then she will no doubt be ready for us." "I don't care. Once I get my hands on her, I'm gonna tear her apart," RC vowed. "Keep a level head, RC. I am worried for Jack's safety as well, but we cannot allow our anger to cloud our judgment from the mission. Once we have made sure Jack is safe, I will call Ratchet to ground bridge us and Bumblebee will take him back to base," Optimus Prime said. "And what about Arachnid?" RC snarled. "Her fate will be decided when we learn of Jack's fate. If he is harmed in any way, then we do what must be done," Optimus Prime promised her. As grim as it was, Arachnid had become too large a threat, and if she had not already transmitted their base's coordinates to Megatron, then she must not be allowed, and that could only mean her instant demise. Elite 1. Why did you have to follow this path? He thought sadly to himself. He blamed himself for sending her out on that mission that eventually led to her joining the Decepticon ranks. He remembered the grim looks on the scouting team's faces when they reported what they believed to be true. Tailgate had been silent the entire time, and he felt something was off about the whole team's reaction to losing Elite 1. Cliffjumper had been a member of that team, but he had sustained too much damage when trying to repair the ship after the creatures had attacked them. If he had been operational at the time, he was sure that Cliffjumper would have done everything in his power to save Elite 1. But the others, he was not. As it was, he feared pairing anyone with the rest of the team, but with the war and the loss of numbers on their side, he was forced to overlook their questionable judgment and pair them off where they were needed. He was very reluctant to team him up with RC, but as it turned out the two were a perfect match and they performed admirably. They were the best team when they worked together, and he started to trust Tailgate once again after he proved time and again to be right there when RC needed backup. He felt that maybe Tailgate had taken the loss of Elite 1 to heart and would not allow another Autobot to fall behind. If that was the case, then maybe there had been one fortunate thing to come from that tragedy. Then by some ironic spin of fate, Elite 1 returned and dubbed herself by the Decepticon name she used now. How she had survived had been a great mystery, and it left Optimus doubtful once more of most of the members of the scouting team, including Tailgate. Then when news of Tailgate and RC's capture had reached him, he feared the worst of what may come. Somehow Primus had chosen to smile down on RC when Bumblebee and Cliffjumper had finally found her and saved her from her fate. It branded Arachnid an enemy forever in RC's optics after forcing her to bear witness to her revenge on Tailgate for being a part of the team that abandoned her, but there was nothing that could have been done. The truth of that mission had been kept a locked secret between the members of the scouting team, and because of their actions had borne a terrible darkness in the form of Arachnid. Optimus had not chosen to reveal what he knew about Arachnid to RC. She was not of the right mind to judge it correctly, and he worried it would only fuel her animosity toward the spider-like Decepticon, and he himself had foolishly dreamt that there was a chance to save Arachnid and bring her back to their side. That chance had disappeared the moment she abducted Jack. He could not allow her to get away with bringing a human into this war, even if they had a brief history. The fact that she had chosen to harm innocent lives could not be overlooked anymore by the Prime. He will see she pays for her crimes and make sure she never hurt another living being again. He only hoped for Arachnid's sake that she had not yet done anything to Jack. Optimus Prime had been so focused on maintaining his speed and course that he did not pick up on the flying object circling over their heads in the night sky. The object observed them until they had reached the mines and watched as they searched the area for something. When they could not find whatever they sought, the two smaller Autobots entered the mine while Optimus Prime himself had to look for an alternate entrance as he was too big to squeeze into the short tunnel entrance. The Flyer waited until the Prime finally found a side entrance big enough for him to get on his hands and knee plates to crawl into. Whatever was in the mine, it had the Autobots determined, and the Flyer knew it needed to report back to its one and only master. Megatron. Laserbeak shrieked out a frightening cry and sent out a signal to Soundwave to inform the Decepticon spymaster of what he had discovered, then continued to observe the situation and then make its own way into the mine to spy on the Autobots.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!